Okay, can everyone see my screen? Excellent, excellent. Well, I think it's time to get started here. So I'm Julian Alssid with Unmudl, and I want to welcome everyone to our webinar on DynamicPaths. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. We're going to be limiting the Q&A to Zoom chat. So if any of the speakers can answer your questions in real time, we'll do just that. And if not, we are recording the webinar and we'll be sure to get back to you. I want to begin by introducing our esteemed panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. Let's see, everyone knows Holly Zanville in the box to my left. Hi, Holly. Holly's currently co-directing the program on skills, credentials, and workforce policy at the George Washington University Institute of Public Policy, and she'll be speaking about on the research that she's done documenting the first 2 years of Unmudl. And hopefully you were able to attend the May 14th webinar where Holly first presented this work. If not, the archived webinars, it's a must-see, and it's available at unmudl.com. So today's webinar is the first in a series that will unpack Holly's work. So this time around the state of non-credit and credit programming. After Holly, we'll hear from two Unmudl partners extraordinaire, Erica Barrero from Central New Mexico Community College and Ian Rourke from Pima Community College. Erica and Ian will speak to the approaches their colleges are taking to addressing issues related to non-credit and credit. And then Ramji Rakavan will talk about how his firm, Progress Systems, is partnering with Unmudl and others to create technology tools that help students understand the opportunities and paths from credit to non-credit, as well as job opportunities. And then after the presentations, we'll pivot to a roundtable discussion and Q&A. And again, we invite you, everyone here to chat with us at any point, throw up your questions. And we have a special guest in the box to my right. Parminder Jasal, the CEO of Social Tech and Unmudl, has joined us. So glad you're here, Parminder, and she's the mastermind of all of this. So it's really great to have you on board as well. So before I hand it over to Holly, I want to say a few words about Unmudl, what we call DynamicPaths. So Unmudl is a skills-to-job marketplace that connects learners to and employers to a network of leading community colleges that span the US. We currently have college partners in New Mexico, Arizona, represented here today, as well as California, Michigan, New York, and Washington State. And our main target are the 64.5 million working learners in the US, people working at least 20 hours a week, or really some not working, who know they need training to get a better job. And these are the people who we would say are, quote, in the muddle. They lack money and time and a sense of the return on investment for the training available to them. So Unmudl helps these folks by making it easy to access courses and short-term credential programs that lead to jobs and higher credentials. And Unmudl also serves employers who use the marketplace to source diverse talent directly from courses and programs. And Unmudl has been, through Unmudl, we're partnering with the workforce or non-credit side of the community colleges because they can be most responsive to employer needs. And needless to say, the connections between credit and non-credit are a central part of this effort, both within each of the Unmudl colleges and then across the college network. And as I said, Unmudl is the brainchild of Parminder, who began working with the leaders of our founding colleges over 2 years ago. So we're so fortunate to have had Holly capture the history and learnings of this work in her recent report. And so Holly, without further ado, I'll toss it to you.
Thanks so much, Julian, and hello, everyone. The Unmudl Report, which is a snapshot in time as Unmudl reaches its 2-year milestone, is designed to provide insights to the college collective as they work on improving the model, and insights to many outside the collective who've been looking over their shoulders, wanting to understand what Unmudl is, how it can improve the nation's education to work challenges, and key issues that must be solved for the model to work well. Among these issues, one is really paramount: non-credit and credit. These words, non-credit and credit, don't sound like such a big deal, but today's panel is here to remind us that it is. Are we talking about two sides of a coin that have the same value? Or are we talking about two sides of a coin that have potentially different values? To answer this question, I'm reminded of two words often used in the legal profession that most of us don't like to hear: it depends. Picture millions of learners lining up at a road that has two forks ahead. One fork is the credit road and the other fork is the non-credit road. And our learners are scanning down the roads to see if there are bridges crossing the two. Too often they're not seeing bridges, and there are no guides to help them pick a path. And too often there's a signpost at the fork that's blinking on and off. It depends. It depends. Well, it depends on what, the millions ask. What do we gain or lose with the path that we select? For too long, we have not answered this question, or frankly, not answered it very well. What I was reminded of over and over when I interviewed the college leadership to write the Unmudl Report was that non-credit and credit are tied to the college's role in workforce development and their work in transfer. The transfer role prepares learners to leave the college to move to a university to pursue a baccalaureate degree, or at some colleges actually to enter a community college baccalaureate program. The driver in this role is the bachelor's degree, thought to be the gold standard for so long. But that is changing as workforce needs are changing. Many have questioned if everyone needs a bachelor's degree. The answer is not really in dispute. Everyone does not need a bachelor's degree, but the data suggests that folks need some education beyond high school. Does that mean, though, that everyone needs credit currency to stand behind their credentials, whether certificates, badges, or other short-term credentials? Here's where the answers are not so clear. One answer is non-credit is fine to get started. It's what you can get at the beginning of a long trek down the lifetime road toward education and career success. Another answer is non-credit courses and programs are good in some industry sectors like IT, but not others like those that are highly regulatory like healthcare. And then we hear, well, non-credit is a good start, but we need bridges and stacking to credit credentials like degrees. Is this because credit is worth more? Are we back to the two-sided coin in which the credit side does carry more value than the non-credit side? So we have to again invoke our it depends. We'll hear more about the non-credit to credit permutations from Ian, Eric, and Ranji in a few minutes. My role today is to share what I learned about non-credit and credit in writing the Unmudl Report. So let me take a moment to give you a quick overview of the report if you have not seen it yet. There's 5 sections. Section 1 focuses on who is involved in the Community College Collective Network, the more than 160 people, along with messages from the President's Council, the Champions Group, Unmudl's CEO, and me. Section 2 focuses on the planning. How did the colleges come up with this particular solution, this model, to address future education and workforce issues? Section 3 is the snapshot of the design of the model and operationalization. Colleges that want to consider joining Unmudl in the future will need to understand the model, especially the 19 common principles and perspectives of operating Unmudl that the founding colleges have come up with, and their good neighbor policy to trust one another in putting quality courses up at the Unmudl Marketplace, and to commit to counting toward a credential courses taken by learners at any of the colleges in the collective. Section 4 then focuses on the many key issues the colleges face, and among the top 4 issues, actually 3 of the 4 are related to non-credit and credit issues, and I'll come back to this in a moment. And the last section, 5, is the Let's Look Forward section. What is coming now that Unmudl is built? The next pushes will be national marketing, so students know about Unmudl, getting more good content up at the e-commerce marketplace, bringing on more colleges and employers, setting metrics and assessing progress, and yes, making improvements in the non-credit to credit issues that they face. So that's the Unmudl Report structure. Today, we're looking at this major impact impacting community colleges in the new Unmudl model, the bifurcated non-credit and credit systems. A recent education strategy group quote captures the history and the problem pretty succinctly, I think. Community colleges have long held dual missions of preparing workers in their local communities and preparing students for transfer to bachelor's degree programs at four-year institutions. However, as community colleges developed, these two missions diverged into separate tracks, with one focusing on non-credit workforce training and the other focusing on degrees and transfer. This has led to a bifurcated institutional structure that does not equitably serve and prepare all students for workforce opportunities and career advancement. So why is this really a problem, though? Dual missions, separate tracks, bifurcated systems, forks in the road, because not all students are served fairly, because there are confusing and different funding systems in place, with one system typically better funded than the other, because students don't know which road to go down for good career choices, because the faculty don't always serve both systems well. Often there are separate groups of faculty for each system. And really troubling because this two-part structure has resulted in a kind of a class system. The workforce side of the shop has too often been viewed as second class and sent the message that workforce training is not as important or viable as transfer. When the Unmudl partners identified those 19 common principles and shared perspectives to guide their work that I mentioned earlier, 11 of the 19 focused on non-credit and credit issues, or 58%. That's really a lot. I'm not going to read you the 11, but there's a slide that shows that they're there. But I want you to know they're in the report. Julian, if you would move the slide, please.
Sure.
But I want you to basically know that there is 11 of the 19 which are speaking to many of the aspects of credit and non-credit. The Unmudl vision envisions that the divisions between credit and non-credit must be realigned, coordinated, and potentially merged, because the differences between them, between credit and non-credit, are diminishing and serving working learners and employers as we climb out of the pandemic recession. But this does not mean that the need and intent is to absolve the system of non-credit altogether and make everything credit-based. Rather, the vision is to meld the accessibility and the flexibility that typically comes with non-credit with the quality and credibility of credit as determined by outcomes in the labor market. So what I hope you'll do is look at the many sections of the report that do speak to non-credit and credit, particularly in the areas of organization, financing, and offerings. Well, let me close my takeaways with three key views on non-credit to credit that I'm particularly left with. First, though a condition of joining Unmudl as a community college was a commitment by the college to align their credit and non-credit operations and reduce or eliminate the silos between them, the colleges have approached their commitments in various ways, and frankly, their progress varies considerably. There are still divisions and mistrust between non-credit and credit functions at some of the colleges, and these have got to be addressed. Second, there is a lack of financial support mechanisms for non-credit offerings. For example, there's no or limited federal financial aid, no or limited state apportionment funds for non-credit. National advocacy efforts to extend federal Title IV financial aid funds to non-credit enrollments and use employment outcomes as the validation metric rather than, say, accreditation status are in consideration, and that's very good news for many of us. But there's growing recognition of the need to provide financial support for short-term workforce-oriented courses and programs. And third, and I think this is really good news, many solutions are underway on the non-credit and credit front, particularly in the Unmudl collective, like development of prior learning assessment mechanisms, dual contract arrangements for faculty to cover separate payment formulas for teaching credit and non-credit courses, leadership folks messaging on the importance of learner-centric pathways, whatever shape that may take, and providing advising and wraparound services to help learners make good decisions about courses to enroll in when they are standing at that fork in the road. So I hope this gives you some sense of the ways that credit and non-credit are woven throughout the Unmudl report. And Julian, it's back to you now so we can hear what's happening on the ground to improve the non-credit to credit dilemmas that are impacting learners and the colleges.
Great, thank you so much, Holly. Great framing, and I do encourage people to dig into the report because it's very, very meaty. So now we get to hear from the colleges, and so first up will be, as I said, Erica and Ian will both sort of talk about the approaches their colleges are taking to address issues related to credit and non-credit. But Erica, you have often said that Unmudl is being used as a catalyst for change at Central New Mexico Community College. Do tell.
So as Holly already referenced, at a lot of community colleges, the academic unit that offers the degree, credit-bearing certificates and degree programs is often operated completely separate from the workforce training continuing ed unit. And so at Central New Mexico Community College, where I work, this was definitely the case, which means, when Holly talks about the two paths and students needing to choose the path, they're walking into, I would say, not even two different buildings, but maybe even two different geographic regions. And they're not, their experience traditionally has been very different. There's some advantages to that. For instance, students that are going to do a degree program have to do an application or have had to do an application that is much more extensive in asking about their history in terms of college transfer credits, their high school transcript, other types of demographic information, residency information that is really important to determining whether or not they're eligible for federal financial aid. It meets requirements on things that we have to report. Whereas a student that is entering through the workforce training continuing ed has like a 5-minute experience versus, where they're just basically giving us their name, their phone number, their address, and signing up for whatever course they'd like to sign up for. And so those differences are important. But what we're realizing, and really one of the ways that Unmudl has been a catalyst for change for us, is how do we take where those places have synergy that both types of students should experience in a similar way. So one of the things that Unmudl allows students to do is kind of enter with minimal information and get to signing up and registering for a course that they need. And so as a college, if this is appealing to any learner as a learner experience, particularly working learners who are raising children, perhaps going to work full time, and they have very little time. One of the things that we can start looking at is, how might we ask just a little bit of information at the front end from credit students so that those experiences, right? And then we ask more as they come to us. So we're thinking about how is it that we take that Unmudl onboarding experience for the learner and replicate that in some way for the credit side of the house. The other reason, Unmudl has been a catalyst for change at our college is that another example is that our college's marketing department strictly marketed for degree and certificate programs. The workforce training had their own marketing staff, but very small compared to what the larger college has. And those that were working in marketing on the credit side of the house didn't really understand how non-credit and workforce continuing ed could actually be an enrollment strategy for the larger college. And the same in terms of how we interact with alumni. A lot of times we were promoting new courses, different types of offerings to our alumni students who were no longer eligible for financial aid, instead of considering, wait a minute, these are students that already have a history with our institution have had good learning experiences, how might we actually think about them as the next step in their educational journey? Might be that they need continuing ed and workforce training. And one of the things that I would just emphasize that Holly didn't go into detail about, but one of the things that I think has really caused a dramatic change in the ways that we're thinking about the educational journey that we provide is that previously, whether you got learning from the workforce continuing ed, or from the academic side where you were taking degrees and certificates, generally those skills that you earned were good for most of giving you an opportunity to use those for a lifetime of career, right? You maybe had to update once in a while, but what the research we know now, right, is the half-life of skills, which measures how long skills are relevant in the workforce, is shorter than ever. And so, there was a recent report by the World Economic Forum that said, at least 35% of all skills needed for jobs across the industries have changed. And that was pre-pandemic. And that 25% of workers don't believe that their current skills match to the demands of their current jobs. So all of that creates a context that really puts urgency around the ability of students to move fluidly between credit and non-credit experiences. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ian, to talk more specifically about how they're thinking about curriculum to do that.
Great, thank you, Erica. I always learn so much from you when you present as a colleague and peer through Unmudl. And Holly, just amazing. I really didn't know the analogy you would use, and the two paths in the woods is sometimes cliche, right? And we choose to take the path less traveled. But in this case, really, we're blazing a new path. What we're saying is this path and this path is a false dichotomy. And as Erica indicated, it's really about the currency of skills and their relevance that the working learner and learning worker needs at that point in their life and in that point in their career. At PIMA, we recognized for many years the challenges that we were all facing with respect to the four superpowers: automation, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, mobile technology, and how they are forcing rapid change in the nature of working and learning, and a displacement of parts of jobs or the whole of jobs, and how those technologies were dramatically impacting low-income learners and low-income earners the most in our community. And then on top of that, we had the demographic changes, not only in terms of race, ethnicity, and other people group identity, but aging. People are in the workplace longer, and also we have fewer and fewer people who are young coming to us. There are more opportunity youth in our community now in Pima County in Southern Arizona than there are high school graduates. And there are more displaced workers than all of those categories combined, with a labor force participation rate of 60% or less in many or most communities in these United States. We know we have to do something different than offering a traditional linear career pathway of stackable certificates and degrees to all learners, as if that's going to ubiquitously solve all of these challenges, because it won't. We also have to stop looking at stop-outs and dropouts and lack of persistence through a student deficit model and understand that maybe it's the linear pathway that is the result, that is resulting in all of the stop-outs. Because people's lives and people's career trajectories are seldom linear, but yet almost everything we did in the traditional sense at our colleges was. So this mismatch had to be met by a complete unbundling of the curriculum. So how we've approached the non-credit and credit dichotomy, of course, within the parameters of our creditor and of course, within the parameters of our state and the federal agency, but really looking at everything we can do to blur that distinction to a competency-based end. So for reskilling purposes, we are building micro pathways that are predicated on that non-credit on-ramp for all the reasons that Holly indicated and Erica, ease of access, but also finding ways to compensate for that lack of funding for those adult learners who are coming into those micro pathways. We are, and I think it is valuable that they do stack through prior learning assessment into our credit programs. But equally, we also know that we have to have the upskilling opportunities for working learners to remain relevant in their career and have those opportunities to either stay in their current job and or progress in their career pathway. So we offer a robust suite of non-credit offerings that are post-certificate, post-degree, and in many cases, we're offering a broad range of offerings for people who have bachelor's or professional degrees already. One is our Applied Technology Academy, where we work with the engineering community in both aerospace and defense and in mining here in Southern Arizona to upskill engineers with the most recent technology in machining and welding and robotics and AI that is oftentimes delivered by our technical faculty at the associate and certificate degree level. How we've blended all of this together at Pima Community College is through our Centers of Excellence paradigm, where it is our faculty and it is our deans working in concert with the workforce development team, the business development and engagement team to develop these programs and offer them through and with our faculty in the same labs and through and under the same dean. We had to do a lot of change with respect to where the money flows and where it goes, and realize that we are one college serving one community, and that this funding stream is not for your department. This funding stream is not for the continuing ed department or the workforce department. This funding stream is to build better capacity so that we can better serve the people that we're doing, that we're serving in our community and our employer partners as well. We've seen that employers have also embraced this and are more often starting to send people into our micro pathways that we're developing, and as well as our upskilling opportunities, and are willing to pay for the learners to participate in those programs and studies. So for us, it is about the final piece is universal design. From here on out, every time we create a new course, through workforce development, curriculum and instruction, and Pima Online, those are the three entities that have part in co-developing or try-developing a new course. We designed every single course in career tech and workforce education in terms of at the same time being delivered in non-credit, being delivered in credit, being delivered in hybrid if feasible, online if feasible, and face-to-face all at the same time through one single design process, so that then the appropriate pieces can be pulled out and delivered either virtually and or face-to-face. We have a lot more work to do, but this is the new path that we are blazing, and Unmudl with Parminder, Julian, and the rest of the team is really for us as well been a big catalyst in moving forward with this work at a faster pace.
Well, thanks, Ian. It's like, as this is going to sound really corny, as you and Eric are talking, it gives me chills. I can see the silos and the walls come tumbling down, but it's really interesting to hear how the two institutions approach it, but on some level, it's like, what have we but our skills to take with us to the next stop? So speaking of which, before we shift to the group discussion, I'd love, Ramji, it would be great if you would share with us the Explore tool and talk a bit about how Pragya Systems is working to build paths from credit to non-credit and career and all that sort of stuff. Please. Oh, I don't think we can hear you.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Julian. Yeah, it's been actually a wonderful experience just working with this group and Unmudl and Erica at CNM and Ian at Pima, partly because, I think this is the group that's blazing a new path, right? And sort of creating templates for everybody else to follow. So what I'm going to actually do is show the first evidence of it, right? And I think Erica and Ian talked about the silos that exist, departmentally, within these campuses, and also the challenges that learners face, right? And so I'm going to start off by sort of looking at it from a learner's perspective, right? So if you think about a typical learner, they're trying to go get some education because they want to find the first job, right? But ultimately, they want to find a job that has it's a high growth occupation with a good wage, but also there is sort of a career progression that they can build on, right? And so how do we sort of facilitate that, right? And so I'm going to share my screen and sort of almost walk you through a real life example of how things work today, right? And Unmudl and the work that we've already done, with Erica and her group at CNM, right? So, you guys can see my screen, I suppose, right? So, with the Unmudl Marketplace. So, if you look at this Unmudl Marketplace and you have learners coming here and they're looking for courses that can help them find a job, right? And so now let's pick one of these courses, Deep Dive Java, which is published by CNN, right? And so they go click on that course, and then there's information about the course, right? And there are several other of the other courses that I have out here, and I'll sort of show you the real life examples of these. Deep Dive Full Stack and Deep Dive Java, and these are all different courses. And I'm going to show you examples in tech, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in tech, right? But if you look at this, there is information about the course, how much it costs and all of that stuff. But on the right bottom, you see that this particular course that they take actually articulates into 4 credit pathways that Ian and Erica talked about, right? And in the past, these were 2 completely different silos, right? And so, learners couldn't understand, how this would actually amount to anything beyond this course. And, we've already started creating these bridges. And so if you look at this, box on the bottom, you can see that by taking this course, the CNM would offer you 15 credits towards, this particular certificate program, and 12 credits towards another certificate program. And likewise, there could be degree options, right? And so you get 18 credits towards an AAS degree, right? And so in this particular example, there are several different 4 credit pathways that you can pursue, right? By going down one of these paths, right? And so now, if I take one particular example, and I say, you know what, I'm interested in actually pursuing this and getting a certificate in web programming, right? And so you can click on that, and you've got some information that pops up, right? Which is sort of describing that you need 40 credits overall, and this course gets you 12 credits, right? And you can also look at career prospects, because ultimately that's what matters, right? So making a connection between education and careers at every step of the way, right? One, for this course, but also, why do I care about, taking this and getting myself a certificate or an AAS degree, right? What are the career prospects if I do that? But the other part that, I think Ian mentioned is, so we live in a world where it's all going to be unbundled education, right? So you've got 36 million adults who've got some credits and no credential, right? And over 6 million of them are looking to come back, right? And so often, you've got learners who've actually taken some courses before, right? And so you could come in and say, look, let me see. I mean, I've taken some of these courses before. In fact, I've taken a course in PHP web programming. And so I can come and say, you know what, I want to add that, right, to my analysis, right? And so it's not just the 12 credits that this course in Unmudl is going to get me, but I've also got 3 other credits that I may have gone to CNM in the past, and I've got that, right? And so then I can come in and say, you know what, let me go look at what career prospects are there, right? When if I go through this particular certificate program, right? And so now we take them to this exploration of career prospects for this particular program, right? And so we go pull data from BLS and ONET. We partner with Burning Glass to pull regional labor market data. And then also we connect to, all of the different, requirements that are needed to complete the program, from the institution, right? And so now a learner could come in here, and so they could say, look, this is a high growth profession for, 14% growth. And, these are the jobs, this is the income, what are the different career paths that they could go to, and, give a quick view of, what kind of credential, you need, right? And so, if I'm coming in with a certificate, there is a reasonable percentage of people who become, a designer or a web developer or a web programmer, right? I can also look at, what are the top companies that recruit, right, for this kind of jobs? What are the kinds of skills that I need, right? And the skills could be foundational skills, like communication skills and teamwork and collaboration, which we all agree that human skills are, as important, if not more important than anything else. But there are also specialized skills, right? Like knowing JavaScript or security. And, we would also, like, if there is, certain skills that actually provide a specific salary boost, then we would call that out as well, right? So the basic idea is there's information out there. So how can we contextually pull all of this information to help guide a learner make a decision, right? And give them sort of comfort about something like this, right? And so, but it's not just about national data, right? And I could come in and say, you know what, how about in Albuquerque, right? So let me look at what companies actually recruit around Albuquerque, right? And you've got Sandia and UNM. And so you can regionally sort of deep dive and look at all of these different things. You can look at other careers, right? And so this is where it starts getting interesting, right? And so now I may come in, I may start as a web designer, right? And so I can look at the web designer career, a little bit deeper, right? And the same thing, but looking at it from a specific, career perspective. But I can also now look at, how can I build on this, right? What are the related careers, right? And so if I start as a web designer, where can I go to, right? And I can become a web developer, right? And these are advancement careers, right? And so it sort of gives people, so now if you now step back, right, and where we originally started, right, it said, look, here is a certificate, another example, certified ethical hacker course that you can take, but you can take that course and now build it into an AS degree with a cybersecurity concentration, right? So there's a progression of how you can sort of build, this education and bundle them together, right? But then the same thing applies because there's a corollary of how your career also progresses, right? And so by adding on, a certificate and adding on an AS degree, giving people a reason as to why they should do that, right? And so hopefully it gives people an idea, right? And so this is, a completely different example that I can pick. And it sort of shows something similar, right? Which is a network administrator, and so there are these PLA credit for prior learning rules that the colleges have, and our goal is, how can we sort of articulate to the learner and make it easy for them to understand how these things can stack together, but also understand, what does it mean from a career perspective. And help them explore all of these different things together.
Wow, it is incredible technology. Question for you before. So let's now. Okay, now we're officially turning this into a discussion. So first of all, I'll facilitate, but I want anyone on the panel to dive in, and of course, anyone in the audience, please chat away. But I guess question I have for you is, I think the technology is amazing. I've been so excited using it, and kind of just all the different layers, both national data, regional data, beginning to see sort of the paths and adjacencies and where the kind of take you. From your perspective, Ramji, as an in ed, you're the ed tech person here. We're all kind of workforce and educator peoples. What do you see as some of the challenges that you're dealing with and others in the ed tech community now and kind of coming down the pike? I think because part of what Unmudl is about is this. It really is this combination of ed tech and kind of intermediary. And I'm always for me, it's almost more interesting to learn about what are the techie people seeing. And you're right at the forefront of this. So
yeah, I mean, I think the Unmudl experience and working with institutions like CNM and PIMA, right, is both good and bad, right? So on one hand, this is sort of the front end of the curve, right? And they are the innovators, right? But the reality is, right, if you sort of, and I think that's the challenge for us, collectively, right? So there is, if you look at higher ed overall, there is a resistance to innovation and startups, and they're just not nimble enough, right? And so, often I think the challenge is, there is technology, there is innovation. In fact, in some cases, it may have been developed, like, AI is a good example, right? So, we are leveraging AI to help analyze learner skills, right? And so AI has been used for similar purposes in other industries, but really we can have a real impact by bringing this into education, right? And so I think there is, having more institutions like the Unmudl group, right? And I think that's one challenge from an edtech perspective. The other one really is the overall funding ecosystem, right? And I think that's a particular challenge. And as someone who's been involved in venture-funded companies in other industries, in the mobile world and the content world, I mean, I've had companies where, with a couple of slides, right, we've had VCs who've put together a Series A term sheet, right, so to say, for funding. It's impossible, right, for that to happen in education, right? And, because there is, people are risk averse, right? And I think there is a necessity for there to be investors and funders who are long-term focused, right, who are impact driven, but also not be risk averse, right? And so, but that doesn't mean that we cannot build businesses that are scalable and can make money, right? They can absolutely coexist, because we don't want technology and solutions that die on the vine, right? So we want these things to grow and have a big scalable impact. And I think we need the funding ecosystem, and it could be I think some of the work that we're doing right now is sort of an indication of it, but overall that has to happen, right? So some changes have to happen. And the third one I would say is sort of the friction between educational institutions and private institutions, so the public-private friction, right? And so be it workforce boards and job centers and colleges, as well as private employers and last mile training providers. But I think some of this work that we are doing here is sort of an example of how that friction can be removed, right? Because if prior learning articulation and credit for prior learning can be actually templatized, right? Then I think that removes some of this friction, right? And I think this is sort of a first example of what we are, what I think institutions like CNM and PIMA have demonstrated, right? So
Ramzi, let me ask you a question. It strikes me that most of the colleges and universities that I know, their IT people are really busy just doing the basic operations of their institutions, and they don't have I'll say the capacity, I don't know if that's quite the right word, to do this kind of a setup. And so the intermediaries, the tech vendors, are really important in order to bring about these innovations, would be my take. So, and I don't know if everybody understands the role of kind of the intermediaries. And I wonder, and maybe Erica and Ian would speak to that too, is how do you set these things up, and how can we make more quickly these innovations occur through the help of intermediaries?
Briefly for PIMA, and we're really following what Erica and her team have done at CNM with some of the tools that you've seen today and are working with Ramji. I think that frankly the vendor matters, and I'm not just saying that because Ramji's on this call, but many of the vendors come across as too salesy or too pushy, and that is the first thing to drive away your internal IT team at a community college, and rightfully so. They have a role in protecting the data systems of our learners and the data systems for our institutions. And so we on the ground who are driving this innovation have to do so with respect and deference to the role that they also play on the team. For us at PIMA, that means bringing them in on the front end. People generally support that which they help create, and that includes, in this case, bringing in the different functional areas of the institution. That said, that means the institution has to be at a place where it realizes that non-credit workforce training, reskilling, and upskilling are a core function of the institution, not just a random unit over to the side. And so at least that's the way it is for us at PIMA. Now that we've crossed that threshold, these sorts of implementation projects do go a little bit smoother than, say, in the past.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, so and maybe just answer this, Ian, but I was curious to sort of pose, and any and all of you can really take this one on. What do you see as sort of the biggest, if you had to pick the biggest issue or the top two related that we have to solve related to credit and non-credit? What would you say they are? I mean, you've touched on a lot of issues here, and they're all big. But I'm really curious just to hear, almost like popcorn style. Erica. What would you say of all the issues you've laid out for us or you've heard discussed? What are the big here?
I'm gonna list a couple, but I think it is one of the biggest issues that Ian's referenced and talked about is is really getting all of the stakeholder buy-in from both sides of the house. Because I'll tell you, those that work on the workforce training side have their criticism about the academic side. those that work on the academic side have their criticism about workforce training. And so it's really bringing together stakeholders and appreciating that both stakeholders have beautiful strengths for the audiences that they work with. And our job, and both offer really strong, valid, quality learning experiences, and to be able to get them then to work together, to come to the table, and to design those pathways that are best for learners. So acknowledging that credit is a wonderful opportunity for students, as is non-credit. So I think that's it. And then I will say, community colleges, and I think Parminder recognized this in creating Unmudl, are, we're under-resourced. I mean, we do things at like a 1/10 of what, universities and other institutions do it. And so we run really lean. And so thank goodness for partners like Ramji, Social Tech, and Unmudl, because it helps us leverage the resources that we have and accelerate it. But it's hard finding the staff and the people that have enough time on their plate, right, to do this future forward type of work rather than just reacting to all the fires that are in front of them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to say that. I mean, it's such a great point. And I think part of, we're so lucky to have colleges that both have, leaders, presidents and chancellors that have the foresight, and then that also have the foresight to put people like you, Erica, and Ian into these jobs where, you can be the resource in a sense in pushing a lot of this forward. It ain't easy. And obviously you need a lot more resources to support you, but even having a person assigned to like bridge credit and non-credit and figure this stuff out. What about others though? Anyone else have anything to add about sort of the biggest issue?
I would concur with everything that Erica said, and in working with individuals like Ramji, like Parminder and you, and also learning from national experts like Holly. I think that the Holly touched on this a lot, and it is the systemic issues with how these things are funded from the federal level on down. And so even the WIOA system itself is underfunded in comparison to other developed nations. Just listening to testimony from the Secretary of Labor recently, we spent 0.1% of our GDP on the WIOA system, whereas similar systems in other developed nations, it's upwards of 0.6% of GDP. In that sounds like small. They're both small decimals, but that's a lot of money in a budget the size of the United States federal government. And so it's really trying to find those other ways outside of the WIOA and in addition to the WIOA system to fund up these programs for working learners. The discussion at Pell is not an easy discussion because there are many entities that don't want to see that happen, sometimes out of a protectionist mindset, but sometimes out of significant concerns about the past performance of some of these short-term training programs. And so I think that what we have to do in all of this, and it is really hard, is proof of concept. We can't wait for the Pell decision to occur before we roll forward with these programs because the people in our community need them now. But it's incumbent upon us as an institution to ensure that it actually leads to a high-paying job and that employers do have that real buy-in. And then we use that testimony to then move the needle with respect to policy and overall systemic change. And it's challenge, it's hard work, and you have to be really dedicated and committed to it and realize that at the end, it's not about these webinars. These are great. It's about the people's in the neighborhoods we drive by each and every single day and really making change to hopefully make their lives better.
Hopefully we're modeling it for policymakers, but Holly, you're our national expert here on policy. What do you think? I mean, what do you think about the federal money, about Pell, about short-term Pell, with respect to this issue? Like, where are we going? Where should we go?
All I can think about is this idea of the two-sided coin. How complicated it is that when one side of the coin, it has a different value than the other side of the coin. And so how can anybody use their currency if one, and it's changing constantly, because I think there's a much better understanding that workforce is got a lot of value, and a lot of those credentials, short-term credentials, are valuable credentials, and we're just trying to get good data now on what is the value, they're not all equally the same, equally valuable, and we have to understand that. So, but meanwhile, we can't wait for 5 years while we do a lot of data studies in a changing marketplace where so many people need to come back to work and employers are trying to figure out what are these credentials. So I actually feel like this is part of the partnership where we have vendors like Ramji who can come in and help the campuses. And we've got the campuses who are beginning to try to make changes. And we have policy that can incent, hopefully, and provide a more even funding. And students begin to understand that they've got to take their life pathway decisions when they get to these forks in the road. And I love Ian's comment, there's more than 2 forks. That's just really worrisome to me. But I mean, I think you're right. So it's just so complicated, and I don't want to make things more complicated, but I want us to know that they are, but that we can work through it together. So that's my long answer for the dilemmas we're all facing.
No, that's a good. I think it's you're a realist, Holly. You know, we know that, and it's a very good measured answer. So, do people really care about credit? Like, who really cares about credit?
Right.
That's kind of like, that's one thing I often ask myself. Like, who cares about this? I mean, obviously, apart from the accreditors and the people who built their entire worlds and institutions around it, but do students really care about credit? Do employers really care about credit? Curious to your thoughts. Holly, you're nodding. I know you just went, but
actually, when I wrote the remarks, I tried to frame it as, because people think that you go from non-credit to credit bridges, but really you could just do away with credit maybe 10 years from now. Maybe learning is learning, and your competent skills are just your competent skills, and we don't have to put them onto 2 or 3 or 4 different separate roads. I wish we could somehow come to some agreement about what is the value of the learning, and without putting a lot of words on it. So that's as much as I'll say.
Okay.
It depends. I go back to that legal term. It depends.
Oh, man.
I mean, as an employer, maybe I can sort of chime in, and then Ian and Erica would sort of. I think this panacea of like skills-based hiring, right? That's where we want to go to. It's not reality yet, right? Because assessment of that is difficult, right? And so what employers do care about is they care about a credential, right? And the credential doesn't necessarily need to be a certificate or an associate's degree. It could be a professional certification, but I think credential is what matters, right? And whether that's driven by a credit-based program or not, probably is less so, right? And so this is from an industry perspective, right? And Ian and Erica can probably jump in from the other side.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. But Erica, please.
No, I think that's, Ramji summarized it perfectly.
Yeah, and Ian, you were nodding earlier about the who cares about credit issues.
I agree. I agree with Holly in how she frames it with it depends, and with Ramji that skills-based hiring is not there yet. But we also know that due to the hybridization of jobs, that it is happening. I'll give you an example. We have a company that we work very closely with, an autonomous vehicle company, and they also hire a lot of software engineers. And their baseline hiring was a bachelor's degree in IT. And we actually sat down with that company because we wanted our students to have the opportunity to work for them. And the highest level we currently complete to is the associate degree level. So we showed them where their jobs matched against the skills for many of the folks they were hiring against our associate degree, and they changed their hiring requirements. I know that that's not moving the needle systemically, but it will take on-the-ground actions and more of that to really help employers see the value that, oh, this is actually about the skill, not about the credential that's behind it. And that will, over time, at least at the local level, start to blur the distinction between the two and really move toward that competency-based environment. So I agree, we're not there yet, but I also think that we are moving in that direction.
Yeah, no, I think I couldn't agree more. And I think, workforce development's got to be driven by demand, and employers need to get their signaling right too. And I think very often their job descriptions, even forgetting competency-based, their job descriptions almost always begin level at having bachelor's in the requirement, which may or may not be required. So if not, I think we can really also help employers move in this direction. So any final thoughts? We're 2 minutes away from the top of the hour. We want to be punctual. We may need to continue this offline and invite others to join us, join this conversation, join our little collaborative and party. I'm going to put up a last slide that shows how you can get in touch. But any of the panelists, any last point, you have 20 seconds. Okay, well, then in that
I mean,
case, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No. I was just going to actually pick up on, I think, Ian's point, which is, the example that he was talking about, the automotive, example in PIMA. We've sort of experienced that with some of the work that we are doing in this future of work challenge, right, with the X Prize. And we didn't talk much about it, but there is this clinical research associate job, which traditionally doesn't require a degree, but employers had always asked for a bachelor's degree, right? It's an admin assistant job, right?
Yep.
And so, we are sort of trying to, essentially we work with employers to try to create a program, right? And this is like ground level medical admin assistant. And I think if this can be done at scale,
Yep.
right? And I think then, it solves some of the problems that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you all so much. Great point, Ramji. I'm glad you mentioned the X Prize. Congratulations on winning that. And would love to, if folks want to learn more, I'll be happy to send them your way. Thank you all for participating, panelists, participants, audience, whatever we call you, and to be continued. And here is my last look at our thank you slide. If I can only find it. Here we go. Come on, you can do it. Thank you slide. There we go. Well, thank you, everyone. There's an official thank you. Visit unmudl.com. Send me an email if you want to know more. We're building this little engine that could, and I think we can have a really big impact thanks to everyone on this webinar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.